where every Arab could grab it in the old city overnight.
Oh.
Should he lose the bike? Should I get him a new one? I would say no.
Make him suffer for a bit.
He should suffer. But it's the summer and he has no bike.
Was it his fault?
Yes, I would say so. Instead of bringing it home, he left it locked up overnight where someone could easily grab it.
Wasn't it locked? Now he knows it was locked.
It was locked, but they probably picked up the whole. If I get it right away, there's no lesson.
No.
How old is he?
10.
No, don't
9 and a
get
half.
bike.
No, you can pay for the bike.
Then he gets.
That's a possibility. He has no money though. He's a pauper.
Money send him out to work.
I was saying, then he gets. He should wait a few days and get it son.
Yes. Send him out to work. That's actually.
Maybe he'll come back here.
He should have to earn it.
Oh, that's expecting next to impossible.
Not leave, not only bicycles, anything.
Right, overnight. Now the question is, so this is mercy versus justice, and ultimately, justice may be mercy, and maybe sometimes mercy is justice.
That's not his fault.
It is his fault.
Yeah,
He was lazy.
And punish him in another
It's
way.
not so.
Punish him another way. But then he doesn't learn to be careful with his bike.
It's finished.
In other words, let's just
He's
maybe.
got to earn the money for the bike.
That's what that said.
When he's earned half of it, but then you introduce him as campaign the other.
Yeah, something like.
I mean, that's his little.
You lend him the money. You lend him the money at low interest.
Give him the back of your hand.
Maybe. Anyway, so let's look at it now. Mercy can be justice. In a way, you look at the person's whole life. And all right, so he messed this one up. But maybe in the context of his whole life, it may be just he should get another bike anyway, because perhaps I neglected giving him this or punished him where he should have been. On the other hand, justice may be mercy. Because if I let this go and get him another bike, he later may be careless with his video camera. And instead of losing $100, he'll lose thousands. Or he may be careless with his car or his house, leave it unlocked. So maybe I'm causing him worse pain if I give him back the bike. It gets complicated. Who just, in our parshas, who just got justice decreed? Moshe. Moshe was decreed must die. Yoshua is to be his successor. His last act is to wage successful war against Sichon and Og and divide up the booty among the tribes and giving their land to Shevet Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh. So what's Moshe's response to this act of justice? What's our parsha for this coming Shabbat? Ve'etchanan, I pleaded for mercy. Moshe does not deny the justice of the sentence because he's failed. The people are no longer able to really have faith in him. The spies was the end for his generation. He had a second chance and muffed it at Mei Merivah. He was not able to sanctify God's name to cause them, Yan Lohem Mantembi, to cause them to have faith. So Moshe is burned out and he's not fit to be the leader. The new leader, Joshua, we know in retrospect, is going to be eminently successful. It says near the end of the book of Joshua, all the days of Joshua, the people did not sin. For the new generation, he's the right leader. Sometimes the old rabbi, though he knows 1,000,000 times more than the young rabbi, and he looks down on the young rabbi. That's a Talmid Chacham. Das is a Rav. Still, the young rabbi is the right one for the new generation, most often, right? And this is the problem in Israel. Older rabbis who are great, great scholars, they will tend to castigate and ban younger, less scholarly, but rabbis who are far more in tune with the soul of the generation, right? So Moshe acknowledges it. If they would take an example from Moshe, Moshe doesn't fight Joshua being the successor, apparently, at least according to one measures. What does he do? He doesn't say there's any justice on his side. Joshua should be the new leader. He's burnt out. He's failed. But for Etchanan, he begs. He asks mercy from God. What does he ask? Not to be the leader. You've begun to show me your glory. God, for religious reasons, I've got to make a pilgrimage to Israel. I can't live my whole life in Borough Park as the Grand Rebbe. I can't do it. in order to see all of your greatness. What does he say? Ve'etchana, I beg, like a person begging for mercy when there is no justice possible. El Hashem ba'et hahi, at that time. When Moshe uses the expression at that time, it indicates specifically at this time. We'll have to see what that expression denotes. Hashem Elokim, you've begun to show your servant your greatness and your wonderful hand, your strong hand. Who's like you in heaven and earth? Who can do as your acts and your mighty deeds? He saw the going out of Egypt. He saw the splitting of the Red Sea. He saw the going through the desert. But all that is not really seeing God unless what? Let me pass over. Not be the leader. Just let me go with the rest. And I will see the land. You see, he's saying, just see it. That's all he wants. He'll come as a tourist, not as the grand rabbi. And let me see the good land, which is on the other side of the Jordan. Hahar Hatov Hazeh, this good mountain. There's a good land and a good mountain here. V'hal Vonon, and Lebanon. The Lebanon. V'hal Lebanon. He doesn't say Lebanon. V'hal Lebanon. So what is all this about? Apparently, Moshe feels he's experienced things of God that no one else ever will experience or did experience. Panim al panim, face to face, God spoke to him. But all that is missing something if he can't see Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. What does it mean, a good land?
He doesn't resent Joshua too.
Huh?
Therefore, he doesn't resent Joshua.
No, he doesn't say. He just says, let me see it. He doesn't say, let me lead the people, let me continue my job. So, ba'etahi, at that time, what does the expression at that time mean? Moshe could just say, I entreated God, I pleaded with God. We know it's that time. He's continuing the story. We're finishing up Moshe's summary of the history of the Jews from Exodus till his death. That's what we're doing now. We're finishing it up. It's called Moshe's first discourse. Moshe has several discourses in the book of Devarim. So what he apparently means by ba'etahi, according to the Medrashim, at that time, his time was up. So he was burnt out. We say, do not scorn any man in Pirkei Avot, because there's no man who does not have his hour. Moshe's hour is up. Conversely, there's no man whom every hour is his hour. And the Medrash says the other day Moshe was telling God what to do. Moshe was prime minister, Moshe was the king, Moshe was the prophet, Moshe was the teacher, Moshe was the Kohen Gadol. Let the earth open and swallow Korach. We don't see God saying anything. Moshe commands it. God says fine. Moshe could command anything. Now, just to cross over the Jordan, he has to get down on his knees and beg, and he's denied. Sees it, but that's all. So every man has his hour. So at this 8, my hour was up. Moshe now is no longer to be the great leader. And the Medrash goes through all sorts of descriptions, how Moshe just won wars and defeated the mightiest kings. But there comes a point in the greatest person's life where their hour is finished. And they're not so great anymore, they're not so powerful, and they're not so strong. That's life. Everybody has a certain time. Another interpretation is, Moshe thought he might continue a while as leader. At that time, when God let him begin the conquest, and he had conquered Sichon and Og, the two mighty kings, which was the beginning of the Israeli conquest. This was the land that would be taken by the 2.5 tribes. At that time, he thought to himself, well, maybe God's changed his mind now. That's another Medrash. So one Medrash says Moshe wouldn't dream of being the leader now. The other Medrash says, yes, he would. And that even though he resisted so much being the leader at first, once he got used to it, he wanted to be the leader. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
But he says, ba'etahi, you psukim back at the end.
Yes, that same, and that would fit very nicely that explanation. The hour had come for Yoshua. And Yoshua I commanded at that time. Verse 21, the end of Devarim. Right, also at that time. Why does he have to say that? Just say I commanded Yoshua. Because his hour had come, as we say in Kohelet, a time for this and a time for that.
Interesting, Rashi doesn't comment there, but in Ve'etchanan he comments on it.
Because he brings Medrash Rabbah, which happens to be in Etchanan on that verse. I saw it in the original Medrash.
Joshua still sees Moshe as the leader while he's alive. All the time that he believes.
Apparently. Some of the Medrashim say that when Moshe said to God, let me go over as a regular tourist and not as the chief rabbi, so God said, okay, let's try it. And he called Yoshua in, and he gave Yoshua some revelations. And Moshe comes over to him, Yeshua, what God say? He says, look, we don't tell those things. If God doesn't tell you, he doesn't want you to know. Something like that. Some of the Medrashim say, when I was with you, I always did understand or something. And Moshe begins to feel a little bit jealous and sad. And before that feeling can mature, Moshe says, God, take me away. Better dead than jealous. Because the last thing that Moshe, who's the most other-centered person in the world, Anav Mikol Adam, the most humble of all people, the last thing Moshe would want is to be jealous of anyone else. Vayesaber Hashem bi, and God refused me. Why did God refuse Moshe? I mean, it's not such a big request. Let me pass over. Why not? God refused L'manchem, for your sakes. So apparently, it doesn't say here, Biglalchem, as it says previously by the spies. Here it says, not because of you, not because I failed with you. L'ma'anchem means for your sake. So somehow it would be very bad for the people if Moshe went over. What's the implication? That the people now need Yoshua as their leader. If Moshe is hanging around, even if he's just a tourist, Yoshua won't be able to do the job. The people won't recognize him. He himself might feel uncomfortable about it. So he has to disappear. V'lo shema elai, and he didn't listen to me. Vayomer Hashem elai, enough, Rablach. Al tosef daber elai od b'davar hazeh. Don't speak to me anymore about this matter. Like God so much loves Moshe, and he so much wants to do what Moshe prays for, so God pleads with Moshe not to plead with him, because for the sake of the people, his prayer shouldn't be answered, but God wants to answer Moshe's prayer, so God says, just please, stop. Go up, but God says, like somebody can't make the class, we'll show you the video. So God says, go up on the mountain, and I'll show you the whole thing. It's just as good. You'll see it. You want to experience Israel? You'll do it from a perspective. It says, go up on the mountain and lift your eyes. The term lift your eyes means look with intention, with concentration, like Lot lifted his eyes and saw the rich, lush area of Sodom and Amorah, and so forth. Each one lifts his eyes for what he seeks. So look with eagerness. Yama tzafona v'teimala mizracha, all four directions, and see with your own eyes, because you will not cross this Jordan. Well, God said, don't ask me anymore. He means no. So why does God have to add, you will not cross this Jordan again? Any ideas? There's still one other possibility. Even though Moshe crossing the Jordan wouldn't be good for the Jewish people, there's one way he could cross the Jordan that would be okay for the Jewish people. Dead. So at least fly me by El Al and bury me in Eretz Israel. That's reasonable. So that's the other thing, and especially Moshe, who took the bother to take Joseph's bones for burial in Israel. He certainly deserves that his own bones should be buried in Israel. So you won't even cross this Jordan. Why not? Now, why is that important for the people? So the Medrash has two versions. Moshe just spoke to them about all their sins and how they sinned with the pagan women, with Baal Peor, with the Midianite women, with the idol of a particularly ugly cult. The Medrash says like this: suppose somebody drops on the street some little coins, 1 agura, 5 agurot, and he's a pretty important person. What does he do? Leaves them. Suppose he drops a $100 bill with those coins.
Would pick them up.
And then what does he pick up? Everything. Once he's picking already, he picks everything. The Dor HaMidbar, the original generation, because of the Meraglim, is sentenced to die in the desert. And their sin is very, very serious, and God might never resurrect them or bring them back, the Medrash says. They're not worth picking up. But if Moshe's there too, in that same desert, so while he's scooping up Moshe, he'll scoop them up. Very interesting idea. It's the concept that somehow being buried near a tzaddik helps you. You sort of roll along with him. Right? Another concept is the Jews sin there with Baal Peor. And Moshe's burial will somehow get them atonement. He's buried near where they sinned with Baal Peor. Anyway, these are Hasidic concepts at this point. So our Sedra seems to start out Hasidish in that Moshe is to be buried with his flock where he can help them according to the Medrash.
Isn't Moshe buried within the territory of Israel?
No, he's buried, well, in
Across the Jordan,
in Transjordan, not Israel proper. But Savas, yeah.
Isn't it made because they didn't want Israel, the children of Israel, to idolize the place where Moshe...
That's one version. These Midrashim are giving a different version. Or, God could have buried him in an unknown site in Israel. But God stresses, you shall not pass over this Jordan. Not alive or dead, no way. So he could have given them an unknown site in Israel. So apparently Moshe has to be buried in Chutz La'aretz. Other Midrashim speak disparagingly of Moshe. Imagine that. If you even spoke disparagingly of Reb Shach, they'll put you in Cherem. They'll leave alone the Shulchan Aruch. And the Midrashim spoke against Moshe. They said, you know what the trouble was? Joseph, even though he was the prime minister of Egypt, and he ended the Zionist enterprise and brought everybody down to Egypt instead of sending food there, but Joseph was a real Zionist at heart. He did what he had to do. And what did Joseph say when he was in the prison and brought to Pharaoh? He said, I'm a Jewish boy, or an Ivri boy, whatever it means exactly. I'm from a Nar Ivri, and I was stolen to here. So his self-identification never was Egyptian. With Moses, when he runs away from Pharaoh and goes to Midian, and he helps the daughters at the well, the daughters of Yitro, what do they tell their daddy? Ish Mitzri Hitzilani. An Egyptian guy saved us down at the well. So apparently Moshe came on as an Egyptian guy. So because he came on as an Egyptian guy, he never could be buried in Israel. That's the third Medrash.
Joseph was actually born in Israel.
Yeah.
He came from Israel.
Yeah, he's a Yored.
And I think Moshe never...
Not right.
Israel.
Moshe never even saw it. But according to that Medrash, Moshe is punished. What do you see from those Medrashim apparently? Nobody knows. And God writes the Torah in such a way that it leads you to various interpretations, even paradoxical. And in my opinion, it's not that no one knows what God meant, but God wanted these multiple messages, like the paradoxes in physics, because each has its application, and each teaches us an important moral lesson about life. The one lesson, how important the influence of a tzaddik is even after death. The other, how even the greatest tzaddik can have faults, and how non-Zionism, how staying away from Israel, non-Jewish identification, could be the fault of even the greatest man. That would imply there's a temptation toward that sort of thing. If he identifies himself as Ish Mitzri, there's something in even Moshe, which identifies with the world he grew up in, at least. As you pointed out, Moshe never was in Israel. So all of us, I mean, the biggest Zionist comes here, but at some point he's still an American. And there's a temptation to so identify. And each of these things, different ways of reading it, gives a different message, all of which are valid as messages, and God may have deliberately wrote the Torah ambiguously so that we get all those messages out of it.
When did
What actually happened isn't so important, maybe.
When did Moses learn that he's a Jewish boy?
Before that, because he saw his brother, the Jew, he went out to see his brothers, and he saw the Egyptian smiting the Jew, and then he ran away. So this is after that. This is when he went to Midian.
When did he learn that he's a Jewish boy? He was
I would have a hunch from his mother when he was young. And even Pharaoh's daughter said, this must be a little Jewish kid. So it was known. They probably looked different. Or she saw Milah, maybe.
No, she certainly knew. I remember.
Yeah, it says. She says, Mei Ephraim. This is a Jewish baby.
Blue booties.
Yeah, blue booties. Blue and white booties. Okay. V'tzav et Yoshua, and command Yoshua and strengthen him. Give him courage, because he's going to go before the people, and he will give them the land for their inheritance, which you will see. You won't go there, but you'll see it. And then we stayed opposite Beit Peor. According to one of the Midrashim, as I mentioned, that itself is an explanation why Moshe has to be buried there, because they were in the territory of Beit Peor, where terrible sins were done, and somehow his death expiates. Judaism does have the notion that the death of tzaddikim expiates, or somehow makes atonement, and we have it by the Ori Miklat, which we're reading about these days, where the city of refuge, the man stays to improve his personality until the Kohen Gadol dies. And somehow the death of the high priest makes a certain catharsis or atonement, something like that. How it works, I don't know. And now, Israel, listen to the laws and statutes which I am teaching you, to do them. Judaism is not an intellectual religion. We don't believe in pure intellect. We think it's even harmful. Intellect with us is lilmod lasso, to learn to do. And it's to learn and acquire God awareness, Yirat Hashem. Pure intellect is not a Jewish thing. Mohammed called us the people of the book. It's not true. The Gemara, Rashi brings it, also says that anyone who learns Torah without it being a truly religious experience, without having awe of God, Yirat Hashem, that Torah will harm him. This is a very big case against the university teaching of Judaism. Unless it's such a situation where the person can teach it that way, but it usually isn't. So it's to be learnt as the Word of God, as a connection to God. If it's learnt as just another secular intellectual discipline, it's bad for a person. He's better off without it. And that you will live and come and inherit the land which God, the Lord of your fathers, gives to you. Now, very important. The Torah first warns you not against not doing the laws, but against adding laws. We're in, let's see here, we're in verse Beis, Daled Beis, 4-2. Lo tosifu al hadavar asher anochi mitzaveh eschem. First thing is, do not add on to the words which I command you. V'lo sigru mimenu, and do not detract from it. To keep all the mitzvahs of God your Lord, which I command you this day. Which I command you. Apparently the Torah is saying the first danger is don't add on. Because if you add on, in the end you'll come to take off. Very interesting concept. Where do we see that? We see that often if you put too much on a person. If you take a child and try to make him learn too much and be too religious for his own personality, then, by adding on, you will in the end lose and he'll throw the whole thing away. And we had that same message, if you recall, last week. Rashi mentions from the Medrash, why is it that Yaakov didn't want to bawl out Reuven for the terrible things he did to embarrass his father, pressed by emotions for his mother? Because maybe Reuven will run away to Uncle Esav if you bawl him out too much. So you don't always look for the ideal, because in looking for the ideal, you may lose more than you would have if you just left things alone. So a similar concept here, if you add on to God's Torah, then in the end it may be too much of a burden and you'll throw it away. Or a little deeper perhaps, why would someone add on to God's Torah? Because he feels what he's adding on. He can make a new religious object, a black hat. Something has nothing to do with religion. All of a sudden he says, I'm going to say if I wear a black hat, that's religious. He may say such a thing. So by adding that on, he's letting the criteria for what's religious be what? What's the criteria?
To follow the Torah as it is written.
Yeah, but what's his criteria? What feels religious to him? It feels religious to talk Yiddish. It feels religious to wear a black hat. It feels religious to eat chant on Shabbos. Whatever. Things which are not found anywhere in the Torah. So if his religious feeling is the criteria to add some things on, that same religious feeling may turn because he's put things on himself which are more than God wanted, or more than God built him for, like overloading the horse, or putting too big a load in your truck. and it may break down, and then his feelings, well, I know this mitzvah just doesn't inspire me, this doesn't hit me, and he won't do this mitzvah or that mitzvah. So by adding on, what you're doing is making your own feelings the criteria for religious validity, and then when your own feelings change, you are likely, and they will change maybe because you're putting things on which you're not made for, it's too big a load, and then you will go to the other way. And another aspect may be...
too good is no good.
Yeah, too good is no good. All right. The Talmud says, tafasta meruba, if you tried to gather an awful lot, lo tafasta, you've gathered nothing. You've gathered nothing. Another aspect of this, in terms of overload, may be that God gives us a certain amount of religious energy. There was a very controversial article in the newspaper last Thursday, in the Jerusalem Post, by a very well-known professor of Judaism, Neusner. He wrote this article, it's very funny, after my letter appeared, warning of the dangers of Amishization of Judaism by those who condemn Reb Riskin and anything new. So a few days later, he wrote about the Amishization of Judaism in the Post, and he said what's wrong with the Haredi way is not that you won't find it in the sources. They carefully read the sources and do whatever the sources say, but they ignore the most basic realms of life, political organization, things like democracy, economic systems. In other words, religion becomes restricted just to rituals, and therefore most Jews, 95%, sense that this religion is not relevant to life and intuitively avoid it. Very interesting thing. He says, therefore, the religious Zionist way, while it may not be quite as careful or authentic, is better because at least it combines Torah with life. That was his point. I would say something like that, but not quite. If one has only a certain amount of moral energy, the same way you have only a certain amount of physical energy, if I waste my time carrying some heavy packages up and down for an hour, 4 flights of stairs, that means the rest of the day I won't be able to do anything, even things which may be much more important. So the same thing, if I put all my energy and all my mind into trying to learn every chumrah, or trying to do every mitzvah like 1,000%, the thing itself is very good, and it's very nice. But I may use up all the energies, emotional and intellectual and physical, which I have in those things, and have my society look like a Meisharim, where obviously there's no sense of how to make an environment beautiful and pleasant and wholesome and healthful, and you wind up smoking cigarettes and eating junk food and so forth, another park in the place. This kind of thing. Why? Because you're doing so carefully and so thoroughly on certain things that you ignore everything else completely.
But you are a tzaddik when you try to accomplish the Taryag mitzvot.
Yeah, that's enough. In other words, what God is saying here maybe is don't add on. Now, this does not mean you don't make zerot. If you see you're going to violate these laws, if the rabbis see that by having chicken sandwiches with milk, people will come to have beef burgers with milk, then the rabbis have to say no more chicken sandwiches with milk. But that's not trying to add on to the Torah. That's just making sure you keep what is in the Torah. You follow? There's a difference. There are gezerot. But you don't say, I'm going to do new things which just aren't necessary for these 613 mitzvahs. And we have a law of yichud.
But there are many new laws.
Yes, but I'm saying the new laws are all to be protective of the basic law. For example, we have laws, a man is not allowed to sleep with a woman who's a nida. A man is not allowed to have casual sexual relationships. It has to be marriage, or according to some, common law marriage at least, but not just casual sex. So David HaMelech, after Amnon and Tamar, made a law. He added something. He added that you can't be alone in the room with a woman who you might come to have a violation with. Yichud. Fine. So that was added as necessary. From Yichud to separate tables at weddings and a big mechitza in the middle of the wedding that the men can't see the women. Yeah. That's quite a step. And by no means could you make a convincing case that that's going to help prevent any adultery. Indeed, it may sort of stimulate it. I don't know. But the point is, you add on. True, it is the way true. If they're ultra careful, you go into a bakery in Mea Sharim, men stand here, women stand there. They don't obey it anyway, by the way. The sign apparently is enough to get the bakery off the hook. In Brezel's bakery, we have challah imported from Brazil, in Mea Sharim. In Brezel's bakery, there's a sign, one side man, one side women, but it's really not obeyed much. But apparently they have to have the signs there to satisfy the neighborhood mores.
Yeah, it's obeyed by that, but it is important to you.
Yeah, but what happens, you get the people just watching the exact length of every little girl's sleeves. Now, there is, in my opinion, no reasonable question that on the whole that society may have much less of unchaste things than others. Pictures and so forth. The net result of all this super precaution is they may get a little bit better in this realm. But I don't know if it's worth it. Even if it's true. And I'm not sure you get a very, very high population from those areas in Ezrat Nashim and other insane asylums. I've spoken to psychiatrists. The net effect of overdoing it again is sometimes you break the person and you get all sorts of very weird over-preoccupations with these realms. But even, I'm saying, let's say it's granted even that they succeed in making society a little better that way, but if all the energy goes into that, in thinking about how not to think about sex, it's a Bretzlaff trait very often. So when you've done that, you have no energy left to give your kids a decent education, a decent profession, to know about the world, to function in the society effectively, to contribute to your society. So by making almost an idol out of certain mitzvahs, you may come in the end to decrease the number of mitzvahs in which you are actively involved. Okay, so much for that. But the first warning is not to add on.
Yeah, why didn't we just simply say that we're not to corrupt the Torah?
Yes, it's God's Torah.
No,
That's
but
it.
instead of worrying about having too much to do, and, the points that you're making.
You're asking on Gezerot themselves.
Yeah, no, why not interpret the statement as you will not corrupt the Torah? It is permanent, it is the permanent law.
All right, but the problem is we still have Gezerot. Sometimes we know that the law basically won't be obeyed unless we make some other laws. And Moshe himself is the precedent. Like God told him 2 days to keep the people away from Har Sinai, and Moshe thought of a case where something might happen that they're still unclean on the 3rd day, so he said 3 days. And this is Mishnah Torah Devarim, as I pointed out last time. It's a combination of Mishnah and Torah. Moshe begins to add on and interpret things himself because he's supposed to, but only to protect the basic law of God, not to add on. Technically, the prohibition of adding on is where things have numbers. Like 4 species, you'll take 5 instead. You'll add an extra day to a holiday and so forth. Okay. Then he says, your eyes saw what God did at Baal Peor, when you left the Torah. Okay? You must keep the Torah. And you see what happens? God is not lax. God does not forgive violation. Everyone who went after the idol, actually, God destroyed 24,000 people from your midst. And you who clove to God, who were strongly connected to God, your Lord, Chayim Kolchem Hayom, you're all alive today. So it's a life and death matter, at least at this point in history, in a very, very literal way. Now see, I am teaching you laws and statutes as God commanded me. Moshe isn't making up his own laws. To do it in the midst of the land. This suggests the Ramban that the whole purpose of the mitzvahs is for the Jews to build a model state in the land of Israel. And that model state will influence all mankind. And to be a model state, it must encompass every aspect of statehood which mankind practices. Military, medical, social welfare, police, agriculture, economic, everything. You can't be a model state if you're not doing everything. But everything should be somehow different or sanctified or higher or better when done through the Torah. So it's in the midst of the earth, B'kerev ha'aretz, these laws are to be kept. And the Ramban implies that when one does a mitzvah outside of Israel, it's not the full mitzvah. You're keeping in shape, you're keeping in practice, it has lots of good messages for you. But ultimately, mitzvahs are to be done in the land of Israel. Very, very clear. Lasos came B'kerev ha'aretz, which you're coming there to inherit. And guard them and do them, for that's your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the peoples, who will hear of all these statues and say, this is a most amazingly intelligent people. So we have the notion that the state of Israel wants to find favor in the eyes of the world. It's a state which must be permeated by Torah. And their dreams of somehow Israeli technology surpassing Japanese, and that will be their excellence. Or Jaffa oranges surpassing Portuguese, and that will be their excellence. While those things are nice, that's not really going to make the mark of the Jewish people, and will not build the kind of state which someone's willing to sacrifice a lot for. It must be only through the Torah, but a Torah b'keref haaretz, in the midst of the earth. Not a Torah which substitutes for life, but one which sanctifies it. Okay? For what great nation is there who has God so close as God? No intermediaries. As the book says, you take Jesus, I'll take God. Right? We want Mashiach now? Well, yes, but what for? That the Mashiach should teach all the Gentiles, and that they should understand the Jews are the priest people. The Medrash Rabbah, Bereshis, 98.9, that the Mashiach's function is just to get the Jews to come back to Israel, implying it's not an easy job. And once they're back, we'll learn straight from God. No man will teach any other. All your sons and daughters will be prophets, as it says in the book of Joel. And the Mashiach then will teach the non-Jews, who up till now weren't even willing to learn from Moses. All right? So we want God now, is our basic slogan. So there's no people who has God so close to him without any intermediary. We don't need a Mashiach. We don't need any intermediary, basically. And Moshe is also telling them something else now. The people may be in somewhat panic that Moshe is going. And how can we carry on? So Moshe says, I also was a messenger boy. Basically, your contact is with God, not with me. All right? There's no people on this earth. Yes, I'm going to die. And Yeshua may not be me in terms of his closeness to God. But ultimately the Jewish people is to be directly close to God, without intermediaries. Whenever we call to God, he's close to us. And what great people is there who has such laws, righteous laws, like this Torah, which I'm giving before you this day. And this day is always stressed to teach a person should feel it's like this day God created him in the world and gave him the Torah. And we have the same concept in Tehillim, which we say every morning. Right? Magi Devarav LeYaakov, God tells his words to Yaakov, Chukav u'mishpatav LeYisrael, his statutes and laws to Israel, Lo asa chen l'chol goy. He did not do that with any other nation. And then the psalmist adds something. U'mishpatim, not mishpatav, not his laws of the Torah. Any laws, bal yada'um, he has not informed them of. Hallelujah, praise God. What does that mean? Every nation has laws. The United States has laws. Britain has laws. There are laws of science. But the idea is they're not real laws because they change. Any legal system you have, you cannot, if you're an intelligent person, view as absolute because 20 years later or 50 years later there may be another legal system. It's just an arrangement of convenience. It's not true law. Even scientific laws, what we know today, may be completely refuted 20 years from now, 50 years from now. So God teaches the Jews absolute laws of social relations. And no other nation has that, unless they wish to learn from us. So mishpatim, bal yadu. Not mishpatav. They have no laws ultimately. There is no ultimate law outside the Torah. And indeed, the Ramban feels that Ben Noach, one of the sons of Noah who keeps the basic 7 laws, our religion for universal man. According to Ramban, the part about doing justice and having civil law has to be our civil law. According to the Ramban, outstanding jurists of each nation should go to a yeshiva like Chafetz Chaim where they study Choshen Mishpat and get the degree Yadin Yadin, that he's an expert in Jewish civil law, because that's the only absolute civil law which they must apply. Other authorities disagree with him and say any legal system that works and is reasonably fair is okay. Okay? So the Jewish distinction is the closeness to God, having the Torah of God, but one must be very careful. Shmor nafshecha ma'od, because it's so easy to forget what your own eyes saw. And to take words that were so heartfelt off your heart. All the days of your life, as it says in Pirkei Avot, don't be sure of yourself until the day of your death. Because old Yochanan was a Kohen Gadol. In the end of his life, he became non-traditional, a Baitusi. He's 80 years old or so. Suddenly he gave it all up. There's a constant temptation. And a person must always be on his guard. And It's not enough you keep the Torah. It's not enough you learn the Torah. It's not enough you be close to God. Most of the European Jews, or at least a lot of them who came to America, were close to God and had Torah and learned Torah. But there's something else. Vodatam levanecha. You have to teach them to your sons in a way that they will intimately know them, they will feel them. Vayeda olam et chava ishto. It's an intimate knowing, a merging, a oneness. So you mustn't just inform your children of them, but you must be able to pass on the intimate love for Torah to your children too. V'livnei vanecha, and to your grandchildren. And that may be enough. Then you've done your job. Ore vanim levanecha. When you can share insight with your grandchildren, where the generation gap does not interfere as it does in secular society, which is so rapidly changing, Shalom al Yisrael, then the Jews are at peace. Yom asher amata lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'chorev, and there was a day when every Jewish soul, where you stood before God at Chorev. Some say it means because a lot of these Jews of the new generation already were there, but not necessarily. After 40 years, it just could mean that every Jewish soul was there at Sinai. When God said to me, gather all the people and I will tell them my word, that they may learn to have awe of me all the days which they live on the earth, and teach their children. The and teach their children is a very big part. And then everyone stood under the mountain which was burning with fire up to heaven. And God spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard words, but you saw no image. You heard the voice of God, but saw no image of God, only a voice. And he told you his covenant, which he commands you to do it, the 10 words. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And he commanded me to teach you all the laws. The 613 laws, according to Sadia Gaon, ultimately derive from the 10 general principles. In the land, again, to do them in the land. He keeps warning the people. You can make frum shtibels, and you have God here in the desert, and you have the cloud and the manna. You got to leave that beautiful frum shtetl, be it in Borough Park or Europe or Golders Green, wherever it is, and do these mitzvahs in the land. He keeps stressing that, because Moshe is so afraid they're going to repeat the sin of the spies. As soon as God of B'nai Reuven want to take Transjordan, Moshe screams and yells at them, you're going to make the whole people give up, and they'll all go live and drive taxis in Transjordan and give to the United Jordanian Appeal. It can happen. So Moshe is constantly warning them, these mitzvahs have to be done in the state of Israel. Yes, you're going to have wars. Yes, it's going to be difficult. But that's what it has to be. Okay? La'asoschem osam ba'aretz, again, to do them in the land. We're at verse 4:14, which you're passing to inherit. And be very careful for your souls. That you didn't see any image. Don't distort in your soul your image of God by giving him some physical representation. Because you can become corrupted and make statues to worship of animals like the Egyptians did, or of sun and stars as the Canaanites did, whatever it is. And it describes all possible shapes which can be worshipped. There is, according to most, no prohibition on making statues of shapes where it doesn't involve any possible worship. Okay? And you might even see that God's servants, the sun and the moon and the stars in heaven, are fit to be worshipped. After all, they're God's servants. They rule the universe. And God indeed, Asher Chalak Hashem Elokecha Osam L'chol Amim. God doesn't mind so much if the people, other peoples than the Jews, have very great awe of these things. Because for other peoples who didn't have the special mission of the kingdom of priest and holy nation, who did not have God so close to them, who did not get a Torah, for those other people, it's a little bit reasonable to sort of worship the forces of nature. To go up in Vermont and commune with nature is the highest level of God contact. For the Jew, when the sun rises over the horizon in the morning, he shuts his eyes and communicates directly with God through Shemon Esrei. Rabbi Meir said, yes, the sunrise is impressive, but it's nothing compared to contact with the world beyond the sun. Because ultimately there is no hope under the sun. It's a world of death and decay in the midst of life. And you, God has taken from the fiery furnace, from Egypt, to be for his inheritance as this day. Liam Nachala. And God was angry at me because of your words, and he swore that I should not go over the Jordan or come to the good land which God, your Lord, gives you as an inheritance. What's the idea of a good land? Good for its inhabitants, the Ramban says. And Reb Soloveitchik said, what does that mean? He means in some ways the land of Israel is good because it's not so good. If it would be like Egypt, where you automatically get a Nile which inundates, and then you have all the water you need, you don't have to pray, you don't have to worry, you don't have to work so hard. So you remain sort of a schlep. But if you're in a land where it's hard to work, it will yield beautifully, but only with hard work. And you have to pray all the time that there be enough rain in the winter to carry you through the summer. Such land builds a strong people of faith. So it's a good land because it's not so good. And later it's called a broad land. Reb Soloveitchik said it's a broad land because it's not so broad. Since it's a small country, even with the biblical boundaries, compared to something like China, Russia, or the U.S. So you have all types of topography, mountains and plains and the Dead Sea and snow-covered mountains and the sea, 4 climates, all within a small area. So a person traveling around, as Jews are wont to do, will automatically come in contact with all aspects of nature, none of them at their grandest, because no one is to be emphasized so much. We're not idol worshippers. Mount Everest is maybe better than our mountains as a mountain. It's a real mountain. And the Mediterranean as a whole, or US 1, may be more impressive than our beaches. And oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, may be more impressive than seeing the Arava in Israel. But putting it all together and having it close to each other and not so emphasized tends to make a blended personality, because each bit of topography, Reb Soloveitchik said, has its effect on the human being. There's a mountain man personality and a seafaring personality and a desert personality, and the Israeli rolls them all together to balance all the types of personality God has put in the world. So it's a broadening land because it's not so broad, just like it's a good land because it's not so good. Okay? That gives you a little encouragement. Now, Moshe again stresses, I am dying. Ki anochi meis ba'aretz hazos, in this land where you're standing now. I am not crossing the Jordan, and you're crossing and will get this good land. And maybe he's putting a little bit of a guilt trip on them too, which is good. As Rashi said, at the moment he's dying, they're really going to listen to his chastisement. And a good father, as I pointed out, doesn't care so much about pleasant relations with his kids at death. He's more concerned about straightening them out and doing his job and his duty. So Moshe stresses them, I'm dying, pay good attention and do what I'm telling you. Because I've got to give you now, in these 5 weeks, it's about 37 days till he dies, from the beginning of Devarim. And in these 5 weeks, I've got to give you enough to go on for many, many generations in the land of Israel. Okay?
He's been repeating himself.
Huh?
This is a repeat within this parasha.
Yes.
But in last week's parasha, we had the same similar thing.
Yeah, because when you're bawling someone out, you're going to die in 5 weeks, you put it in different words. I say, in this parsha, we shouldn't always ask, why do you have to say this word, or why is this new? Because this is the style of a grand address, of an exhortation, of a chastisement. You got to give it over and over and over to make it sink in. And on the contrary, if you just pass it on once, it'll probably not sink in. It says, be careful, lest you forget the covenant of God your Lord, which he made with you, and start making idols, okay, of everything which God said not to do. And God is a jealous God, and that's good. Because if God weren't so strict, and the Jews didn't think it was so important, we never would have survived. Then Moshe looks to the more distant future. After you're settled in the land for many generations, you won't be able to conceive that you won't be able to be on this land. The land will be prosperous and built up, and you'll have loads of everything, and you'll export. So when you have children and children's children, v'noshantam ba'aretz, and you'll already really be old in the land, or well settled, then you're likely to corrupt yourself and start making idols. Everything that God doesn't want. I warn you this day, with heaven and earth, which are still going to be around. I'm dying, Moshe says, but heaven and earth will still be there. Ki yavo tovedu, you will be destroyed or lost. Quick, from the land which you're going over now to take. You will not be able to prolong your days, but you will be destroyed from it, destroyed as a national entity. And God will scatter you among the peoples, and you will remain a countable group, a small number, a minority, in nations wherever God will choose to lead you. And there you will worship. This is not a warning, this is a fact.
The prophecy.
You will worship there. What kind of gods? Not even the sun and the stars and things which have some real power and meaning. You will worship things which people made. Eitz va'evan, wood and stone, a tech-built house on US 1 in California, a beautiful college in Scarsdale, a nice car of metal and rubber and plastic and glass. So you will worship idols of men's hands.
He means idealized material things.
Yes, which don't see and don't hear, all right? Don't eat and don't smell or breathe. As the advertisements say, Buick, something to believe in. Things go better with Coke. Smart, be sociable, be up to date with Pepsi. I always thought one of the most vulgar and low ads, we should maybe boycott the product, was that a Buick, something to believe in. What? The work of man's hands. Metal which shall rust, glass which shall be smashed, upholstery which shall have holes. Right. And Reb Yaakov Fogelman and Reb Soloveitchik both said, the Torah says you will worship idols in Galus, and yet we see the people of Borough Park and Stanford Hill are very pious. So they both said the same thing. It doesn't mean idols. It means you will adopt their distorted value systems. Again, they're one-sided value systems, stressing one realm instead of all realms in balance. And the American will overstress the American pragmatism. And the German Jew will overstress the German punctuality and exactness. These are all good things in themselves. But each country takes one of these things and blows it out of proportion at the expense of everything else. You will be more concerned with manners than real feeling as the Britisher, and so forth. Each thing will be well overemphasized. Instead of just enjoying good food, you will seek it with a passion like the French and Italians. All right? La dolce vita. So, after you yourself feel empty and disgusted with what you're doing in these places, someday, somewhere, will be kashtem misham. You will seek God. The Jew will join every cult, every movement that promises spiritual deliverance. Will be kashtem misham, from Galus, es Hashem Elokecha, umatzasa, and you'll find him. But Reb Soloveitchik said, you'll never find God if you don't look for him. If you just accept God as he was handed down to you, if you daven 3 times a day and do all the mitzvahs and learn, but never made your own search, never asked your own questions, we're never a Mavakesh Hashem, you will never be a Motzei Hashem, no matter how firm you are. There'll be a certain dullness and deadness about you, because you're working robot-like, not as a thinking person. Ki yisivchashenu, but only if you seek b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha, with all your heart and all your soul. And then, what will happen in those beautiful galus, at some point or another, batzai lecha, it's going to get rotten for you. Umsucha kol devar ma'ela, and all kinds of bad things will find you b'acharit hayamim, in the end of days. And there's an end of days in each galus, not just the collective one. V'shavta, a prediction, a promise, that you will return ad Hashem Elokecha. Maybe not El, but at least toward God. V'shemata b'kolo. And God is merciful. No matter how bad the Jews were, for how long, lo yarpecha v'lo yashchitecha. He won't ever let you go. He won't ever completely forget about you. He won't ever completely destroy you. And he will never forget the covenant which he made with your fathers. And you should ask about the beginnings of your people. He's speaking a long time later when they're well settled in the land. Okay? From the day that God created man, not just the Jews, but from the day that God created man on the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the others, was there anything like this? Or did you even hear about it? The people should hear the whole people should hear God speaking from heaven, from in the midst of the Aish, as you heard and survived? Or has God ever taken a nation out from the midst of a nation, as he took the Jews out of Egypt? Okay? With wonders and miracles and so forth. You have begun to know that God, or have been taught to know that God, He is the Lord. Ein od milvado. It's not just He's a power or force. There's nothing besides Him. He is everything. And from heaven you heard His voice to chastise you. It's not just hearing His voice, having a gooey religious experience, a mystical experience. It's to make you do things. It's to make you change life. And on the earth He showed you His great fire, and His words you heard from the midst of the earth. And as He loved your fathers and chose their seed after them, and He took you out with such power from Egypt, and He let you replace or inherit nations far more powerful than you. CF 1948. To bring you, to give you their land for an inheritance as this day. And know this day and reflect upon it. It's not enough just to read the words or learn it intellectually, but know it intimately and keep going over it in your heart. That God is the Lord in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. You must keep His statutes and His mitzvahs, which I'm commanding you this day. That should be good for you and your children after you. That you should be many days on the land, which God's giving to you forever, if you're worthy of it. Okay. And at that point, Moshe again didn't just talk, but Moshe did what he could do to do God's mitzvahs. He separated 3 of the 6 cities which were to be on that side of the Jordan. Remember that 2.5 tribe territory had as many cities of refuge for negligent homicide as did the whole much bigger territory of 9.5 tribes on the other side. Right? And the idea is that in a cattle-oriented Dallas society where they put their cattle before their children and didn't even think of their wives till Moshe corrected them. In such a society, you're not so careful about the effects of what you do. You run a little bit wild. Your foot's on the accelerator. And you don't worry that maybe a little child's running out in the street. So in such a society, negligent homicide is much, much more frequent, and you need more of these cities of refuge. That's the generally accepted interpretation. Others say because they had a big territory for their cattle, and you didn't want people to have to run too far to the city of refuge if they killed negligently, so therefore you needed 3, even though there was a much lesser population. So Moshe made the 3 cities of refuge, and they're named. Then, V'zot HaTorah, and now he goes into a main function of Bereshit, according to the Rambam, the main function, for which everything else was introduction. V'zot HaTorah, this is the Torah Asher Sam Moshe, which Moshe placed before the children of Israel. These are the testimonies and statutes and laws which Moshe spoke to the children of Israel when they went out of Egypt. What's the difficulty? Right. He's doing this as he's about to die. So Rashi explains, this is not new Torah, but it's not so simple. There are about 70 new laws in Devarim. But this is the same Torah he gave them when they went out from Mitzrayim, but put in different words suitable for a new generation. Again, the new generation, even the 10 Commandments, has changes in words. Because the new generation's mentality and experience is not the same as the old generation. And if the old generation found that learning Shulchan Aruch kept them close to God, the new generation might need to learn Rambams, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe seems to have successfully done. And it's not fair to say our grandfathers never had a Rambam campaign in criticism of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, because we're not our grandfathers. We don't wear the same clothes, eat the same food. We have the spirit of Yisrael Saba. We're to keep up the spirit of grandfather, but not necessarily his language, food, clothes, and choice in literature. Okay? So Moshe now, in different words, tells the new younger generation what he's old, but it's the same Torah which he gave the older generation when they went out from Egypt. That one's okay. Now we get into trouble. On the other side of the Jordan, in the valley, opposite Beit Peor, in the land of Sichon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, whom Moshe slew with the children of Israel when they went out from Egypt. Any problems?
Yeah, well, he slew this gentleman Sichon, not immediately went out of Egypt.
Right. This is a major problem
recently,
which hit me when I went over the Sedra this week. I don't know if I ever thought about it in the previous year. It's okay, I could get around that this is the Torah which he gave them when they went out from Egypt. He's repeating it now. But to say that he conquered the land of Sichon, the Amorite kingdom, when they went out of Egypt, it's not true. It's simply not true. He didn't conquer it twice. I looked in all the Mefarshim, Rashi, the Ramban, and so forth, Ibn Ezra, as I recall. Guess what they say?
Well, technically,
Nothing. Not one of them comments.
Technically, it was right. But the whole 40 years would say it was a child.
Yeah, is that bit say something? It's right. He went out. You wouldn't say I left New York when you left 40 years ago. I was on the trip. It's difficult. Then I looked in what we English speakers have, which they Hebrew speakers don't have. In the index to our Cincino Talmud, there's a list of every verse in the Torah and where it's quoted in the Talmud. So I simply looked up Deuteronomy 4:46. Guess which verse of the Talmud it's quoted in? Which tractate? None. So I absolutely so far have found nothing to answer this question. So I thought about it myself. And I thought of a possible answer that would explain both these verses. It's very easy to get the Jews out of Egypt, but it's not so easy to get the Egypt out of the Jews, right? You can physically take them out. You bring a Jew here from America, from Yemen, from Germany, wherever he comes from, and he's out. That's it. He's out, and he's not out. Inside, as I mentioned before, even Moshe, Ish Mitzri, Yitzhak, he's still there. Until the last day, every nice person advanced in years from Germany and Austria will be going to the Jerusalem Theater to hear symphonies. Every American will be going to Richie's to eat pizza. There's certain things which stay. Here too, when did the Jews really leave Egypt? Physically right away. But when did they leave Egypt? When they, the ex-slaves, who weren't used to self-guidance and certainly not to being the masters and the ones who take charge and responsibility. When they learn and really study the Torah from Moshe, a second time, going through it deeply, not just accepting it then immediately making a golden calf. At that point they're going out from Egypt. This is the Torah given when you went out from Egypt, when you went out from the Egypt of your own soul. And similarly, when they went out from Egypt, at Seit Tobim Mitzrayim is when Bnei Yisrael, when did they do it? When they conquered Sichon and Og. When they waged their first major war against the whole kingdom, not just a skirmish. Not just a skirmish against Amalek or Melech Harad, but a real war, conquering a country. At that point, they weren't ex-slaves anymore. They had gone out of the narrow places of being trampled down, stifled in people. Okay? 1948 is when the Jews left the concentration camps. Not 1945. 1945 they left. But when you really saw they left is when those same people in 1948 could defeat, with God's help, the hordes of British trained and supplied Arabs who came against them. That's when they really left. Okay? That's how I would interpret the verse. I didn't see any commentary or question on it. And then they inherited their land, and the land of Og Melech HaBashan, the two great Amorite kings, and he describes it. All right? And then Moshe called all Israel and said to them, Shema Yisrael, now pay attention. It's not enough just to have heard it once. Really get into it. All the laws of God, which I'm telling in your ears this day, and learn them and do them. God made a covenant with us in Chorev, and not just with our fathers, the old generation did he make that covenant, but with us, everybody who's standing here this day. And as we say in Pirkei Avot, every day a voice goes out from Har Sinai, today, this morning, and says, woe to the creations, to the creatures, for their ignoring, their slighting of the Torah. Panim b'fanim diber Hashem imachem. God spoke to you face to face. The chidush being that you could look God in the face, so to speak. You could look at the manifestation of God that appeared, as Moshe did. The other prophets, it's different. The other prophets, according to the Zohar, couldn't look at God. They fell down on the ground. Even though he didn't appear to them directly, he only appeared to them through a dream, they could not even take that directly. Only Moshe could. And that would submit perhaps the Jews did at this moment. Okay? So that's how God spoke to you. I was standing between God and you at that time to tell you the word of God, This is after the Ten Commandments probably, because you were afraid of the fire. And you didn't go up on the mountain as I did. And now the Ten Commandments are repeated with slight variations for the new age. I am God your Lord, different language, but the same ideas, who took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slaves. Not from Beit Abdu, the house of slavery, because ultimately you weren't the slaves there. Egypt itself was the slave. The Egyptians were the slaves, because they were slaves to their own passions. It was a passion-ridden, orgiastic, pleasure-ridden culture. So a person can be the master and be the slave if he can't control himself. So I took you out of a house of slaves. They may have had bad influence on you, but the real slaves were the Egyptians themselves. You shall have, and once you're out, you have no other gods with me, God says. And don't make any statues or images, even images. This is after the golden calf now. Nothing on heaven or in the earth you shall not worship, implying that you should not make them when they're likely to be objects of worship. For I am God, a jealous God, who considers, and what you do has effect, not just on yourself, but for generations to come. Pokei, Vashem pokadat tzara kasher diber, who considers, who keeps in mind the sin of the fathers, abanim, vis-a-vis their children. Okay? 3 or 4 generations of those who hate me. There can be impact of what you do till it's all watered down through marriage. 3 or 4 generations on your descendants. And a good deed can engender good consequences for thousands of generations. For those who love me and keep my mitzvahs. Not enough just to keep mitzvahs. Keeping mitzvahs won't have such effect for thousands of generations. You can have religious parents and chuck the whole thing if you feel they're religious robots or they're not people who are filled with love of God and man. But if you love me and keep my mitzvahs, and not just love me in your heart, a Jew at heart, but demonstrate that love, then that can have effect for thousands of generations. May we all be able to do it. Lo sisa Hashem Hashem Elokecha lashav. Mustn't take God's name in vain, swearing needlessly or falsely. God won't wipe off such a thing, someone who does it. Guard the Shabbos. Before we're taught to remember the Shabbos, the positive things like Kiddush. Now we're taught to guard that on that one day we recognize God as the boss of all our creative labor by refraining from certain creative labors. L'kadsho, to sanctify it as God has commanded. 6 days work and do all you have to do. That could be an argument against the 5-day week. However, I would say that the rest day is part of your work as opposed to holy work. And the 7th day is a Shabbos to God your Lord. Don't do any creative work, and that's defined. You and your son and daughter and servant and maidservant and cow and donkey and all your animals and the stranger in your gates, that your servants may rest just like you. She ain't there. I always notice that. Very good. Your wife isn't there because my common observation is the hardest day in the week for a woman is Shabbos. All the food and serving and cleaning and guests.
That's Friday.
No, the cooking is Friday, but the serving and cleaning, unless the rest of the family helps. But I noticed that too. It doesn't say your wife. It's interesting. Unless we say, V'hayu levasar echad. There's supposed to be one person. And Shabbos, when they have the extra soul and really know how to act right, should be that day when they most feel their oneness. So your wife is included in you. That's a nicer way to look at it. You and yours, right. But not your child. Your child is never you. Your wife and you may become one. It never says your child and you will become one. It's interesting. In fact, your child's supposed to leave his father and his mother to form his own house, at least the males of the species. And remember, you were once a servant in the land of Egypt, and God took you out from there with a strong hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, he commands you to keep Shabbat. Treat well your father and your mother. Father has to come first because people like their mothers better. Generally, the mothers were nicer to them, and they feel like being nicer to their mothers, so father comes first. In the other version, where it's Ish, as Imo Vesaviv Tiro, where you have to have awe and reverence, there we have to put mother first, because everybody's a little bit scared of his father, at least in the old days. And the mother you're not so scared of. So the Torah has to stress the awe of the mother and treating the father well. And this is the fifth pivotal commandment of the 10. As God commanded you, that your lives should be long, and it should be good for you on the land which God gives to you. So we see parent-child relations as a basis for continued pleasant settlement of the land of Israel. And indeed, parent-child relations, we read, are maybe the most important thing in the world. What is the function of Eliyahu Hanavi before Mashiach comes? When the world is almost going off the deep end, he will return the hearts of fathers to their children. And once that happens, the children will feel happy about their parents again too. That's Eliyahu's function. And then what does God say? Lest I destroy the whole world. Because as I see it, as we're getting into the end of the world period, and there's such rapid changes in lifestyles and communications and so forth, never was the parent-child gap as big in history as it is now. And such a gap, we can see even from modern psychological writings, can cause grave, grave harm to the very essence of man. And humanity can corrupt itself and wreck itself, and what everyone knew was a perversion, an abomination, now can be called an alternative lifestyle. And the net result is the whole world will self-destruct. So Eliyahu must come to turn parents' hearts back to their children. Then the children will shape up too. Solution is Eliyahu, apparently.
Yeah.
Rav Zolti Zal once said, Rav Zolti Zal once said, chief rabbi of Jerusalem, he was a real chief rabbi, and he said that if it's Eliyahu or the Mashiach who have to get parents and children together, it's a sign it isn't an easy thing. It's a sign it's not such an easy thing. The same way if the Mashiach is supposed to make the Jews come on Aliyah, it's not such an easy thing. Okay, so then we have, you shall not murder, commit adultery, take another man's wife, or steal, kidnap. And you mustn't give false testimony, and you mustn't covet another man's wife. Don't arouse desire for her. And don't, it's a different verb now, lo titaveh. Do not acquire desire for your neighbor's house, field, or servant, or maidservant, cow, donkey, anything which belongs to your neighbor. Some say the Torah actually prohibits the feelings, just turn your mind and heart elsewhere. Some say it's not the feelings, but action. You mustn't take any action. For example, you like his house. You don't want to steal it. You're a decent person. I'll give you a good price for it. Don't want to sell it. I'll give you more. And you keep nudging him day and night to sell it. That's lo sachmo. It's his house. Even if you want to give him a lot of money, you're trying to pressure him to give up what's his. Right? This is against aggressive salesmanship, probably, or aggressive soliciting for charity. Even that may be, because a man has a right to pick which charity he wants to give to. All these things God spoke to you, all your congregation. This is Yehuda Halevi's argument. Judaism doesn't rest on an idea or an argument. It rests on a historical experience. The whole people, we have a tradition that God appeared to our whole people, and each was told to teach his sons. And you can't make up such a thing. And Christians don't have such a story. Say a few people saw Jesus do miracles. The Mohammedans don't have such a story. A few people saw Muhammad go to heaven. Why didn't they say that God appeared to the whole people and said, Jesus or Muhammad is my boy? I've changed my mind, even though I said I would never change my mind? Why don't they have such a story? Because you can't make up such a story, Yehuda Halevi said in the Kuzari. You can't make it up. If it didn't happen and you came and said God appeared to the whole people and said except Christianity, everyone would laugh at you. Because if it had happened, I would have heard about it already from my father. I could tell you a story that a few people saw a miracle. Maybe yeah, maybe no. But I can't make up a story that your whole people saw something. Because if it didn't happen, you can't make it up. People would have heard about it already. But the Jewish people did believe, and intelligent people, and handed down that God appeared to our whole people and told them to teach their children. So the very fact that we have that belief is a very strong indication that it really happened. That's Yehuda Halevi's argument in the Kuzari, which made a tremendous impression on me when I was 18 years old. Okay, now, these words God spoke to all of your congregation in the mountain, in the midst of the fire and cloud and so forth. A great voice never again heard. And he wrote them on 2 tablets and gave them to me. Okay. And when you heard the voice, he said it was too much. Moshe should do the rest as an intermediary, and God liked it, and Moshe liked it. This, before I started out with a nice word for Hasidus, about how the presence of the tzaddik, even after death, can help you along. Now let's take a nice misnagdic word. The concept of religious modesty. Hatznei alechas, Hashem Elokecha. Walk modestly with your God. Religious modesty means, Reb Soloveitchik said, that my feelings of love for God are too intimate that I go around singing and shouting about them. And I don't use stimulants to arouse my religious feeling. No, I don't. I use stimulants like drugs and seances, but I don't use stimulants like vodka or music or dancing. That's the misnagdic view, okay? No stimulants. The idea itself turns me on. Nothing external. I don't have to get together with a group and shout, I want X, or something like that. Okay? So, when the Jews said it's too much for them, we're not on a level to have such religious enthusiasm or insight as direct contact with God. God said, that's very fine that you know your place. That's very fine that you know that you don't just jump into God, so to speak. That you don't just right away feel you can be on a very, very high level. No, religious modesty, like all other modesty, is a commendable thing in Judaism. So that's the misnagid part of this shir. Okay? And Reb Soloveitchik said, while he spoke at the Yud Tet Kislev banquet in Boston for Chabad, so the subject he chose to speak on is, why did the Misnagdim reject Hasidus? And he claimed it's because they took the Kodesh Kodashim, the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies of the human being, his feelings toward God and his fellow man, and they put them right out in front of the whole public. And only the Kohen Gadol, with the highest of trepidation, is to go once a year into the Kodesh Kodashim. You don't expose it to the public. Interesting. Then I thought, what's wrong with the Misnagdim? What's wrong with the Misnagdim is they turned the whole tabernacle into Kodesh Kodashim. They won't hug their kids. That was the practice in Lithuania. Soloveitchik said, his father shook hands when he went to Germany. He may never see him again. He doesn't remember him ever holding him. They kept the emotions so much inside that they turned even the most basic, simple, everyday life, the Chatzer, where all the people could enter, into a Kodesh Kodashim. So maybe the Hasidim were too open, and the Misnagdim too closed up. Or you might describe it, in modern parlance, is diuretic and constipated personality types. Enough said. Now, so God approved of this religious modesty. Still, in the end of days, we hope they'll be on a level that they can see God directly. According to the Misnagdim, the Hasidim might have jumped the gun. In the end of days, again, as the book of Joel says, all your sons and all your daughters will be prophets. Okay? And it never happened such a thing in history before or after, that everyone heard God like this, until B'hu Yashmi'en Yeshenis. The second time God will let us hear, B'yenei Kol Chai, in the presence of all flesh, not just the Jews, that he is our God. And, all right? Then, after that, God said, right, tell the Jews, go back to your tents. Remember, there was family separation. There was celibacy for a couple days. That they could not live together as husband and wife sexually while God's revelation was going on, because it might engender technical problems of Tumah. So they're to go back to their tents. But you, Moshe, are to stay up with me. So Moshe then never lives with his wife again, because Moshe never stops the Sinai experience. Moshe is always there at one with God. Only Moshe. Huh?
At his age, I don't think it bothered him much.
Ah, but his 120 was halavai like our 20. The Torah says his eyes didn't dim and so forth, and his full vigor and moisture was there, and so forth. Okay. And like you see every once in a while in the newspaper, the old Yemenite who dies at 110, leaving behind his fourth or fifth wife and like 25 children. Boker tizra zarecha, it says in Kohelet, in the morning you should sow your seed, uba'erev al tanach yodecha, and in the evening let your hand lie not fallow, because you know not which will be your best product. And the Talmud says if you had many children when you're young, have more when you're older. How the wife ties into this is a problem. Okay. So God says they should go back to their tents, and you stay with me, Moshe. So that's why Moshe can't live with his wife. And Miriam and Aaron say, well, we're prophets, and we live with husbands and wives. Ah, but there's a difference. And that's what God tells them. Great people have to understand there's greater. Okay, so Moshe then became the intermediary, and they should obey all the laws and not to turn from them right or left. Okay? Then he starts presenting an outline of all the mitzvahs, and he starts off basically with Shema Yisrael. These are all the mitzvahs which are the way of life that's to be lived in the land flowing with milk and honey. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I would interpret as Hirsch, that hear, O Israel, God, who transcends all nature, is also Elokeinu, the Lord of nature. Elokim 86, Hateva, the Lord of nature. As a Jew does not differentiate between the world beyond this earth and the world on this earth. He tries to integrate them. Hashem Echad, God is one. Elokim is never called Echad, because God is manifested in nature, is a variety. As the mitzvahs, in the mitzvah system, is a variety. We're coming to Shema v'dibarta bam, speak in them. Not speak the Torah, v'dibarta oto. Speak in them. There's a plurality. As I point out, each mitzvah is different. If you put too much emphasis on some mitzvahs, you wind up ignoring other ones and have a distorted Torah. You must give equal attention to everything. So that's how, this is the drasha of the Zohar on this parsha. The Zohar says, v'dibarta bam, you shall speak of them, that mitzvahs are plurality. You see that ties into Shema too. Hashem Echad. But Elokim is a pluralistic manifestation of God as the mitzvahs themselves. And the ayin and dalet are stressed, forming the word aid, that the Jew is witness to this principle. The big ayin and the big dalet that you see in the Chumash. And Hirsch wants to say, it's also to make sure that you don't misread it and say Shema, maybe, instead of Shema here, if it had an aleph. And that you don't say Acher, Hashem is one of many, instead of Echad. So you stress that it's a dalet. Hirsch wants to say that. You should love God with all your heart, and with all your might and all your soul. Reb Chaim Lifshitz, the rabbi psychologist in French Hill, said this is a very important part of the Torah. I can't love God with your heart, and I can't love God with your heart. I have to love God with my own heart, with my own unique personality. Reb Zusha, the great Hasidic master, said, nobody's going to ask me why I wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu, but they will ask me why I wasn't Zusha. What Zusha could have been, Yaakov looking at the image of Yaakov on the throne above, and what he really is down on earth below. We all have an ideal of ourselves, as we are uniquely constituted, and we must worship God with our own unique personalities. It's not enough to learn the things, but they have to be on your heart. Then, only if they're felt in your heart, as I pointed out before, can you teach them to your children. If you are just a bundle of information, but don't really believe the stuff yourself, or don't feel it much, your children aren't going to be interested. And you may be rather ignorant. You may not know so much. But if what you know is heartfelt, your children may hold it better than those of a great scholar. We see this all the time. So V'shinatam levanecha, teach it to them sharply, sharpen their minds on it, the Zohar says. V'shinatam levanecha v'dibarta bam, again. Speak of them, recognizing their individuality, that there's a plurality of mitzvahs as there's a plurality of God in nature. When? V'shivtecha b'veisecha. Not b'veisecha. Could you say in your house? What's shivtecha? So the Zohar says, v'shivtecha b'veisecha. When you sit in peace in your house. How are you going to transmit the Torah? Only if your house is a house of peace where you're not screaming at your kids and your wife and not being an ultra-dictator and so forth. So it has to be when you sit in your house. Okay? When you walk on the way, maybe not when you run. I'll add something to the Zohar, because they didn't do this one. Could you say baderech on the way? No, when you walk with purpose on a path, not running helter-skelter. And you have a path.
Yeah, I think it means when you're engaged in business, when you think what
it's everything. Everything in the world. Ushachbacha, when you lie down, maybe physically, and when you lie down when you're crushed a bit. Uvkumecha, and when you're getting up, when you're very successful, and when you're worn out and broken. Ukshartam and tie them for a sign on your hands. Your actions should be signs of God's word. And your mind should be affected by them, and they're opposite your heart. And your house should be characterized by them. Make mezuzot. The entering of your house should be entering into a kingdom of God. Then when God brings you to the land which he promised to the fathers to give you, And you're going to get all kinds of riches which you didn't do. You'll get nice Arab houses in Talbiya, things which you didn't build, and lands which had been tilled for centuries which you didn't till. Of course, we got as a desert, but there were still things done. And you'll get cisterns which you never dug. And certainly for the coming generations, not the pioneer generation, the third or fourth generation on the kibbutz is just going to inherit the whole business. Be careful. It's a dangerous situation when you haven't worked with difficulty and with faith in God for what you've gotten. Because you can forget God who took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slaves. God your Lord. Okay? You must have awe of and worship Him and swear in His name only. And don't go after other things in this world, idols. Because God is jealous. Again, Moshe keeps pounding it in. And to keep the mitzvahs and do it. It's not enough to keep the mitzvahs. Verse 17, Shemor tishmeru etz mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem, ve'yosavechu kavashet zivach. It's not enough to keep all the mitzvahs. Ve'asita hayashar v'atov b'yeinei Hashem. You must also be a decent person. So this verse implies you shall do the good and right in God's eyes. This implies you could keep all the mitzvahs and not do the good and right in God's eyes. Be a nasty guy, be a rotten guy. Yes, you do everything properly, but you're basically a nasty person. The Ramban says a person may be absolutely obnoxious while observing every halacha meticulously. We occasionally see it around Jerusalem. Then it will be good for you. So it's just by Shabbos it says you should rest, you should cease. Besides the technical things, you get close to God. So each technical realm is summed up by a basic general principle. Then it will be good for you and you will really inherit the land which God promised to your fathers. And He'll drive all your enemies away. Okay? And then, someday in the future when your son asks, here we come to the constant importance of father-son communication, of passing the Torah on to the next generation, Ad Yemot HaMashiach. And we come to the Seder again where your son will ask you, what are all these laws which God commanded? You will tell him we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, as the Haggadah starts off the answer. And God took us out and so forth. And He did wonders, and He brought us to this land, to give us this land which He promised to our fathers. And He commanded us to do all these mitzvahs. And it will be righteousness for us when we observe to do all of this mitzvah before God, with God awareness, not just mechanically, as He commanded it. Not with our additions or subtractions, as He commanded it. Then Moshe goes on to close the parsha. When God will bring you to the land which you're coming to inherit, and you'll throw out all these nations. Either they'll run away, or they'll accept that there be no idols in the land, or you will fight them and kill them. All right? And God will give you victory. Don't be afraid. Destroy them utterly. No false mercy. Lo sechanein. You're not to be merciful on these corrupt idol worshippers. That doesn't mean you're not supposed to be merciful and good to non-Jews. But when it's these 7 nations who had absolutely corrupted themselves in the land of Israel. And do not marry them, because in the end, they will turn the children away from you. And they will worship idols. No intermarriage. Okay. But this is what you should do. Wreck their idolatry. There's tolerance. On the one hand, what we say before, you must not worship the stars, the forces of nature. But God gave those to the other nations, perhaps. And if you see other nations worshiping nature, that's their way of relating to God. Be tolerant of their religion. But when the religion takes on the absurd form, or even if it's not so absurd, but it's idolatry in your own land, this land must be the model for the higher way. We're supposed to bring everybody back to God Himself as it was in Eden. So in our own land, we can tolerate no idolatry. We're tolerant of the people, and we understand they're trying to find God from where they're at. That's what we learned before. God gave sun and moon and stars to other nations. But our land must be a model. Here they have to observe a higher standard if they wish to be in our land. And destroy all the idols in the land. And what does the Israel Museum do? They take rare, difficult to obtain Jewish money, dig up all that old junk of Aphrodite and every other idol that exists, one after the other, this pot, that vase, and just make a huge exhibit of the whole thing. Very strange, very perverse sense of values. But if you leave your connection to the true roots, so you want to find some roots, so the Israeli who's left the Torah goes to the archaeologist to find his roots. Our Canaanite past. What do you mean our Canaanite past? These people tried to kill us, corrupt us, ruin and end our whole mission. You have a little bit around to see what it was like to understand the Torah. But to have room after room of this old junk, which we were told to destroy and bury, doesn't make sense to me. The other museum, the Diaspora Museum, on the contrary, stresses and shows you everything that's positive and beautiful from Torah, from the Jewish people. Okay? For you are a holy people to God. We're up to verse 6 now. 7:6. Your Lord. Okay? He has chosen you to be a special people of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. The Jews are special, the Jews are different. And not because you're the most numerous or powerful people as God crave you. Chashak Hashem b'chem. It's not a rational choice even. God has a love for the Jewish people. And He chose you. Because you're really a minority among all the nations, a little people. But it's from God's love of you and keeping the promise which He promised to your fathers. He's taken you out with a strong hand from the house of slaves again. You're not going to be slaves. By being slaves to God, you will become free of the self-slavery of all other men, such as the Egyptians, away from Paro, the king of Egypt. V'yadata, and you should intimately know, Ki Adonai Elohecha hu Elohim, God your Lord, He is the Lord of nature. Ha'el HaNe'eman, the faithful God, Shomer HaBris, who keeps the covenant, V'achesed, and kindness. To whom? Le'ohavav, to those who love Him, or L'shomer mitzvosav, and those who keep His mitzvahs. Li'elef Dor, for 1,000 generations. Or Meshalem l'sonav el panav, but who pays back to those who hate them in their faces, to destroy them. And He will give it to them right away in His presence. So you get two contrasts here, those who love God and those who hate God. And I have a hunch most people are Beinonim, as the Baal Tanya says, in between. V'shamarta es ha-mitzvah, and you should guard, not just do it, but guard it zealously, that it be preserved and given over to your children and so forth. You should guard the mitzvah and the chukim and the mishpatim, the laws and statutes and commandments, which I command you to do them. Not just to learn about them, but to do them. That's our Parsha. And our Haftorah is Nachamu Ami, where Isaiah promises comfort. And after all the Jews go through to refine them, as a furnace refines metal, in the end of days, they will be back with God, and God will be back with them, and the whole world will rejoice in our being with God in the land of Israel. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah davar Hashem Yerushalayim.
And you hear our song.
Yes.
If you shot them, you'll tell you isn't that the tefillin?
Yes. Well, actually, let me tell you.
But the women say it as well.
Yes, they say it because they're happy that they have civilized men. In other words, the blind man, some say, blind man also says the blessing who opens the eyes, because he's gaining from all the other people whose eyes are open. He couldn't function if there wasn't somebody to help him. So one interpretation, this gets complications with a lot of things as to whether a woman can fulfill a man's duty. For example, things like bris. I mean, where we have to read about bris, she doesn't have the mitzvah, but some say yes, because she ultimately benefits and does her thing by the man having the bris. By the man becoming a religious, spiritual, intellectual, family-oriented being, it enables the Jewish woman to build her Beit HaMikdash. So in a sense, she is involved in the mitzvah of Brit. So similarly with tefillin, by having the man not be the usual savage, wild male. Edith drags Archie to church on Sunday. Archie rather be down at the bowling alley or the bar. By the Jews taming the male with all the mitzvahs and yeshivas and synagogues. It's a male institution. It's not that the woman has a secondary place. It's a male institution. The woman ultimately benefits by that and is able to do her thing. So sure, she reads about it because it's in her greatest interest that the male be tamed.
I think Pukeim is not only
yes, it's also spiritual. Like Re'eh, we're coming to Parashat Re'eh. See, I have given you the state Torah mitzvahs.
open the mind.
Okay. Yeah. So,
Please God, we're going to talk tonight about genealogy, and obviously we're talking genealogy from a Jewish outlook, from a Jewish hashkafa. The whole world today is extremely interested in roots, background, family trees, genealogy, all the different names you can call it, Stammbaum, etc. A lot of the impetus got off the ground with a gentleman called Mr. Haley that did 400 years of his Negro background, and they made a book and then a series of 12 chapters, with the hero being Mr. Kunta Kinte. Obviously, thousands of Jews said, no, I don't mean this in any nasty way, but as a Schwarzer can gain 400